Welcome to a new video from Autoflight Logic that will highlight some of the new features and capabilities that have been added to Autopilot's Waypoint Mode. These features have been added in direct response to requests from our customers. It will provide you greater flexibility in planning and executing paths, as well as how to control the camera, both for images and for videos. I will quickly take you through these features and their benefits, and then show you how to take advantage of them. As a starting point, I highly recommend that you watch the other Autopilot videos, both the introduction videos as well as the two other Waypoint videos. For that reason, I'm going to assume that you understand the basics of creating a Waypoint mission, adding focus triggers, and using tools like the Path Inspector to review your mission. This video will be broken up into three separate sections. First, new path-related actions. Second, new camera actions. And third, new ways to control the quadcopter during your mission. First, under the new path-related actions, I'm going to demonstrate some new ways that you can create and modify paths both for images and for videos. This includes a new drawing tool pattern option, which allows you to automatically create grids and circles in addition to lines. New rounded corner path types, new waypoint action options, which allow you to hover at waypoints and change altitude at waypoints. This also includes a panorama mode and a panorama action, which can be used at the individual waypoint. This will be described more in a separate video. Autoland as a mission completion option. The ability to plan missions at negative altitudes, which when used properly and carefully will actually allow you to set a waypoint below ground level in case you're taking off at a cliff and want to pick a waypoint below the cliff's zero altitude. Next, separate rotate and size control and moving around the overall waypoint mission. And finally, automatic deceleration when approaching waypoints with actions, which means you don't have to manually configure a slower speed at a waypoint to avoid the aircraft overshooting it. In the second section, I'm going to take you through new camera actions. These are things that you can use to better control the camera during waypoint missions. These include camera actions on Engage and Disengage, which is something that's now available in all modes, but allows you to ensure that you're recording once you engage Autopilot. Second, timed camera actions at waypoints, which allows you to tell Autopilot to start taking pictures or doing video when reaching a waypoint. Third, camera triggers. In addition to the camera actions on Engage and Disengage and the camera actions at waypoints, camera triggers can now be defined at arbitrary points along the flight path. Each camera trigger specifies a specific camera action that will be activated when that camera reaches that camera trigger point. Fourth, interpolation between focus trigger with direction and subject focus strategies. This capability creates smooth transitions between the various focus strategies as the quadcopter moves from trigger point to trigger point. And I'll explain this more when we get to the how-to section. And third, there are new ways to control the quadcopter during the mission. These include a mission start marker, which allows you an easy way to restart or start a mission at a different point within the waypoint mission. Second, the use of the left joystick to control the speed and the direction of the flight. And finally, the addition of LCMC, or Lost Connection Mission Completion. Autopilot's flight controller enables many highly unique and powerful controls, but if the quad loses connection with the transmitter, the mission will stop and then return to home. In response to our customers, we've enabled a way to switch to DJI's flight controller and enable a Lost Connection Mission Completion mode. This will allow the mission to continue even if the quad loses connection with the transmitter. I'll take you through the limitations of enabling this later. Okay, we're going to go through some of the path-related actions that have been added to Waypoint Mode. And per some of the feedback that I've received, I'm going to walk you through this step by step, just so you can follow along as I create this mission and introduce some of these new features. I'm going to start by going to Waypoints. And I'm going to be in intermediate mode just so I can keep a couple of the other options open that I want to see. And then I'm going to quickly walk down through some of these options that I've got set so you're set the same way. I'm going to set lost connection to end mission mission type to patrol, so I don't want it to, I don't want to be controlling it by the joystick or giving myself more control there. Let's keep it on patrol. We'll set the patrol limit to 1, so it only does the mission 1 time. I'm going to have it return to home at the completion of the mission, and then I can set the default altitude. Let's set the default altitude to 175 feet. For the sake of it, and I'll keep the speed a little bit slow only because I want to do a grid mission with this after. I'm going to set the path type to straight, and I'm going to set the focus strategy to triggers, and we'll go into the camera engage and disengage a little bit more, particularly some of the camera trigger options. But for right now, let's set the camera on engage to start and the camera on disengage to stop. That'll turn the video on when it starts and turn the video off when it completes. I'm going to go to the lower center of the screen and press the map icon, which will bring up the full map view. Squeeze out a little bit so I can see the entire screen. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the 3 pattern options on this rectangular field and show you the difference, and I'm also going to show you what the impact is of changing some of the corner path types. So let's start by drawing a rectangle around this. Now I'm going to explain why in a second, but I'm not going to complete the rectangle. I'm going to hit the 4 points, and then I'm going to stop at the 4th point. So I'm going to point and click and hold on the lower right-hand corner, new waypoint at start. Then I'm going to point and hold the pencil, and I'm going to draw a rectangle around here, but I'm going to stop at the 3rd point. All right? Now, here are my 3 options: line, grid, and circle. I'm going to click on line, and it's going to do a decent job of trying to follow that and create the necessary number of waypoints. I can increase the number of waypoints, but honestly, for what I'm trying to do, I really only want 4 waypoints. I want to keep this simple. So I'm going to bounce this down, and remember, this is also the number of lines, not the number of waypoints that it's saying. So I'm going to want 3 lines, and I'll explain why there's not a 4th line here in a second. Okay, but right now it's drawing the 3 lines: 1st, 2nd, and 3rd path. I'm going to say done here, and you can see it created the 4 waypoints that I wanted. I'm just going to adjust this a little bit to make it more accurate. This is only because I was a little sloppy in drawing that rectangle. Now, you can see right now it's set to stop at that 4th waypoint. Now, there are 2 ways that I could have this to complete the rectangle. I could draw a line back to the first one and close it, or if I click on the options, and you can see where it says endpoint. Right now it's set endpoint to last waypoint. I think it's a good idea. I'm going to change this to first waypoint. Okay, and you can see now that it's closed the rectangle for me. So this is a basic 4 waypoint mission that I've created by drawing lines. In the other waypoint videos, I've shown there are a couple other ways to create the 4 waypoints, but this is a relatively quick way to do things. So I'm going to save this just so I can have it. Now I'm going to show you what it looks like under grid, and I'm going to go into grid a little bit more. I'm going to hit this thing right in the center, which is the waypoint reference marker, and I'm going to delete all waypoints. Okay? So let's do this one more time, but I'm going to select grid. So I'm going to point and hold on the lower right, and I'm going to hold the pencil, and drag around. I'll stop here again, and I'm going to do grid. Now, what it's going to do is it's going to draw a path that will do a decent job of covering that entire region. I can increase how dense it goes through. Ideally, what I want to do here is I want to have it cover this. I want to get pictures across this entire field. And right now I've probably got too much. So I'm going to cut it down a little bit. So it's something like this. Maybe, this deep is probably decent. Now, if you look in the center, there are a couple options. There's what looks like a little an X with arrows pointing out of it. If I push and hold that, I can make the pattern bigger or smaller. So that's probably about as big as I need it to be. And then if you look on the left of that, there's a little circle with an arrow on it. And if I push and hold that, I can rotate it. So now I'm rotating it, and let me just make it a little bit larger so it covers all the sides. So there. So now I've created a path that will go through and cover the entire field back and forth. Two things that I just want to make sure. If you want to have this thing taking a picture every X seconds and have the screen pointed down, there's a couple things that you need to do. If you tap on waypoint settings in the upper left-hand corner, I would say instead of camera on engage video, change the camera mode to photo and change the photo mode to interval. And I'm going to have to show you in a second here how to set the interval, but this will change it from taking video to taking images. The other thing that we want to do is we want to change the focus strategy, because right now the focus strategy is set to look at something else. We want it the camera looking straight down. So I'm going to change the focus strategy from triggers to direction, and then I'm going to set the pitch from 0 to -90. So that's going to point that camera straight down. The other thing you want to make sure of is that the yaw reference, right in the center here, is set to coarse, because you want it to follow the camera. It doesn't actually make as much of a difference for this, but this will mean that the camera will follow along with the course of the quadcopter and not yaw as it's moving along. So this should be all it needs right now to go through and take pictures as it goes all the way around. The one other thing that you have to change is how frequently it takes pictures. Now, a small quirk: to change the interval settings, you need to be connected to the quadcopter. So to do this, I need to go into the actual, I have to hit done, I have to actually go into the flight dashboard. So hide the inline controls. After entering the flight dashboard, I'm going to hit the camera in the lower left-hand corner, which brings up this screen. Then I'm going to click on video in the center of the screen, and I'm going to switch it from video to interval. But I'm going to switch it to interval, and the little 3 lines to the right of that, you can see there's a photo option, and then an interval option, and then you can see it said how long you want it to capture. I think infinity is good, and then the time interval. This is how frequently you want the picture. You can use this for time-lapse photography as well, but for what we're doing with this grid pattern, let's set it to 2 seconds. And you need to give it a little time to take pictures between, because it does take time to save the pictures, and if you do it too many, you'll start losing images. So this setting, right like that, will take a picture every 2 seconds, looking straight down as it's going through the mission. Okay? So I'm going to go back to this, to the map, and I'm going to delete all the waypoints. And let's show this the one last option here. Point and hold on the lower right hand corner, hit start, drag this, and I'm just going to do that little rectangle again, and I'm going to do circle. And you can see what it did here. It will draw a circle that will encompass that entire area. I can increase the number of waypoints if I want it to be a little bit smoother, or I can decrease it if I want fewer waypoints. Okay? Obviously, you could do an orbit around this location as well, but this is kind of a good way if you want to make sure that it does a large orbit around a field like this. This is a better way to go. I'm going to show you one more real good use for the circle waypoint pattern option, and that's if we have an existing waypoint mission and we want to add an orbit at the end of it. So here we have our standard rectangle waypoint mission, and I'm going to push and hold on the pencil, and then I'm going to draw a rectangle around this building to the right of it, and then press the circle option. And you can see that after I add a little more density, I can add more waypoints to make it a little bit smoother of an orbit. It will now do an orbit around the building at the tail end of this waypoint mission. From here, let's go forward and demonstrate some of the rounded corner path types. And the simplest way to do this is I'm going to go back and I'm going to load in that 4-corner rectangle pattern. So this is obviously our straight corner option. Now if I click on the upper left-hand corner, the 3 lines for the options, and I bring them up, and I change the path type from straight, and let's start with rounded corners. And I hit done. You can see that it does a pretty good job of drawing a path that will not hit each waypoint, but will stay within that path and draw a much smoother path for the quadcopter to follow. The primary use case for using rounded corners versus Bezier curves is if you want straight segments, as well as if you're using LCMC, because LCMC requires this, and I'll explain this and mention this later. I'm now going to demonstrate the Bezier curves. I'm going to go to Options and click on Path Type and change it to Bezier Curves. Hit Done. You can see now it's going to hit each of the 4 waypoints, but it's going to expand out to continue to create a smooth path, but it's a little bit wider of a overall path. My one warning with this is you can see that, especially on segment number 3, it's now crossing over these trees. If you had it set to a lower altitude, thinking you're going to be going around the field, and all of a sudden you're hitting those trees, and those trees are 75, 100 feet up, you're going to clip those trees and have a crash problem. So just be aware of your altitude when you're setting these paths. Let's talk next about the various waypoint action options that are available. And I'm going to go back again to the 4 corners because I think it's a little bit easier to see things. And I'm going to demonstrate the 4 different types there are. So right now we've got this thing set so that at each of the altitudes, or each of the waypoints, it's set to 175 feet. If I wanted to change the altitude for waypoint 2, I could point and hold, click on it, tap the information, and then change the altitude to whatever I wanted. I could change it to 200 feet. Now it's going to fly from 175 feet at waypoint 1 to 200 feet at waypoint 2, and then back down to 175 feet at waypoint 3. But let's say that instead of that, we wanted it to fly from 175 feet to waypoint 2, stay at 175 feet, and then at waypoint 2 rise. Go from 175 feet to 200 feet at waypoint 2. If I go back to waypoint 2, and I'm going to set the altitude back down to 175 feet. So that's the altitude that it's coming in at. All right, and then I am going to go to waypoint actions, which is this bottom option here. Now I've got 3 options here outside of none. I've got hover, vertical, and pano. If I select vertical, this is going to let me set the final altitude that I want. So I can change this now to 200 feet. And I can also set how fast I want the altitude to change. So let's say that I want it to be this, right? Done. So now what it's set to do, and you can see the V over on the left-hand corner, that tells you that it's going to do something vertical. It's going to go from 175 feet at waypoint 1, stay at 175 feet till it gets to waypoint 2, and then rise to 200 feet, and then from there it's going to slowly descend back down to 175 feet over waypoint 3. So let's talk about another waypoint option that's available. If I point and click here at waypoint 3 and I go down to waypoint action, I can say hover. And hover gives me the ability to set it for a period of time. So I can say for 1 minute, stand there and just hover. Now you can see there's an H over on that waypoint. It's now going to go from waypoint 2 to waypoint 3, sit at waypoint 3 for a minute, and since we're doing video, it's just going to sit there and do video. So there's one more waypoint action available to you, and that's pano. We're going to go to waypoint action, and we're going to set pano. Now I'm going to do a whole separate video on pano because there's a lot of options here, but I just want to show you how easy it is to set up a pano at a waypoint. I'm just going to set pano. I'm going to set it to single photo mode. There's HDR and AEB. I'll explain that more later. And I'm just going to do a horizontal 180 pano. Right? That's it. Done. So now what it's set to do is it will do that pano at waypoint 4 and then continue on. Next, I'm going to show you an additional option that was requested by some of our users, and that was the ability to auto land at mission completion and have it end at a different location. So to demonstrate this a little bit better, I'm going to turn off the fact that the first waypoint is the last waypoint. So I'm going to go back to options. I'm going to set the endpoint back to the last waypoint. All right. So this is what it looks like now. So right now it's going to fly 1, 2, 3, 4 and end up at the upper right-hand corner. Now, if I did a return to home here, it's going to return to my original home location or takeoff location. If I look under the options, under mission completion, you can see that it is set to return to home right now. So currently, this waypoint mission will end at waypoint 4 and then do a return to home and come back to the initial takeoff location. If I wanted it to land at waypoint 4, I can click on mission completion and change it from return to home to Autoland. The quad will now fly to waypoint 4 and Autoland. Just be very cognizant and careful that you've set a safe landing location for your quadcopter. A few other options to be aware of. If you want to set a waypoint altitude below sea level or below 0 feet, you now have the ability to do this. So let's say, for example, this is a cliff in Italy, and let's say that I am at this location here, and I want to create a waypoint mission where I start 100 feet up from there, and I want to fly out over the cliff and go down, but I want it to actually be below where I'm standing. The default setting, I believe, is 20 feet. So if I go into the waypoint, click on waypoint 2 here, and I click on options, and I go to the altitude, I'm not going to be able to get it lower than the 20 feet that it's set at. We've now added the ability for those that want to change it. Now what you have to do is you have to go into the actual settings and go to your min altitude, and you'll see that it warns you to be very, very careful because it's telling you that it's unsafe, but you can set it to, let's say, negative 30 meters, 20 meters, whatever you want it to be. And then if I go back to my waypoint mission, I can now set this altitude to be as low as I want. One I kind of hinted at before, and that we've added the ability to change the size and scope of and rotate the waypoint mission with 2 buttons instead of 1. So this X with the arrows, the lower right hand corner in the center, this will make it larger and smaller. All right, so I drag this around, I'll just put it back the way it was. And the circle with the arrow on it, this will rotate it again, but this won't, just doesn't make it bigger or smaller. It just it'll flip it around, but it won't make it bigger or smaller. The one other thing that was added, just to kind of a heads up on this, and it was put in specifically to address the fact that we've now got waypoint actions, is that Autopilot is now smart enough to know that there are waypoint actions set at 2, 3, and 4, and if you've got it set to a higher speed between 1 and 2, it will automatically decelerate when it's approaching those waypoints so that it can slow down, do those actions, do the pano, go from 200 feet down to 175 feet, or hover. It'll intelligently slow down to make room for those actions. Now, we've always had the ability to control the camera and photos directly from the transmitter, starting video and stopping video. What we've done at Autopilot is tried to provide you more control over when you turn the camera off or on, and when you use camera or when you use photos, and when you use video. So as a starting point, you can now, if you go into the options of any mode, not just waypoint, but I'll show you that in a second, you can say turn the camera on when you engage, and then what mode do you want it to be in. So right now, when you turn the camera, when you engage Autopilot, it will start and put on video, and then when you disengage, it'll turn the video off. I can turn it on so it'll take photos and do interval and have that stop. So right now, it's going to, instead of taking video, it'll take camera shots all the way through this entire mission. Let's assume that we want to, again, have it do that vertical rise from 175 feet to 200 feet at waypoint 2, but that's all we want to capture. We want to capture that in video, and then at waypoint 3, we want to have it pause and just do video for that minute that it was sitting there. So I'm going to go back to the overall settings, and I'm going to turn the camera off. So as of now, the camera is not going to be engaged when we start. Now let's go over to waypoint number 2, and I'm going to do that altitude change again. I'm going to do a waypoint action, I'm going to do a vertical, and I'm going to change it to 200 feet. So now again, now it's going to fly to waypoint 2 and then fly from 200 feet, from 175 feet to 200 feet at 6.6 feet per second. Now I'm going to add one more thing to this. I'm going to add in a camera action to start, and I'm going to have it do photos interval. And I can say when I want it to start at. And I can have it start immediately, or I can have it start. That's to give it a little bit more time to pause, just in case you want to let the thing settle in for a second. So let's have it start after 1 second, and boom. So now what it's going to do is it'll fly to waypoint 2, it'll fly from 175 feet to 200 feet, taking images at an interval basis. Okay. Now, one thing you have to remember is that Autopilot will keep taking pictures until you tell it to stop taking pictures. So as of right now, it's going to continue taking pictures as it flies from 2 to 3. I'm going to show you how to stop that in a second. But let's assume that at waypoint 3, we want it to, during that hover, pause for a minute and just do video. So I can click on 3 and then hit settings. I'm going to add a waypoint action. I'm going to do hover. Again, I'm going to do a hover for a minute, and then I'm going to say camera action, start. And I'm going to have it do camera mode video. And I'll let it pause there for a couple seconds just to get things ready. Boom. So as of right now, it is going to go from no camera on unless I turned it on myself. It'll fly to waypoint 2. It'll take interval pictures as it flies from 175 feet to 200 feet. It'll keep taking those intervals because I never told it to turn the camera off until it gets to waypoint 3. It'll pause for a second, turn on video, and then do video for 1 minute. And as of right now, that video is going to keep going as it flies on to waypoint 4 and to the end. It's going to keep flying video. So the issue right now is, how do I turn video off? These are what are called camera triggers. I can add in these camera triggers wherever I want. So if I point and click and hold anywhere on a path, this, I can say new camera trigger. And I can say I want this point, I want the camera to stop at this point. You can see little X that's in there. I'm going to drag this guy down right to here. I don't want it to take pictures there. And I'm going to grab a camera trigger here too. I'm going to stop again. Done. So again, what I've done there is now I've turned off the camera that was going so it doesn't keep taking pictures as it goes along. But let's say, for example, instead of that, we wanted it to start taking interval pictures at this point. So I can change this camera trigger. Start, photos, interval, done. So now, let's just look at what we've got right now. Now it's flying from 1 to 2 with no pictures. It gets to point 2, turns on images, starts taking pictures in an interval mode as it flies from 175 feet to 200 feet. It leaves that, it turns the camera off, so no pictures in segment 2. It gets to waypoint number 3. It will hover there for a minute and take video. And then as soon as it leaves there, it's going to turn interval mode back on and take interval pictures all the way to the end until you turn the camera off. Now again, if I wanted to make sure that the camera was disengaged, I could go back to here under the settings and make sure that the camera was stopped at the end of the mission. It is worth noting that Autopilot is smart enough to know to stop video before starting photo capture, so that if you have back-to-back triggers, there is no need to create a stop trigger action each time to switch as you go back and forth between images and video. One of the primary benefits for camera triggers is to ensure that you have the exact footage that you want without needing to edit the footage each time. You can even create a waypoint mission, have it record a specific segment with the video camera, and then reuse that segment and length at a different time of the day or even a different location altogether. Finally, let's talk about the ability to provide interpolation between focus triggers with direction and subject focus triggers. I'm going to start with our basic rectangle waypoint mission with a focus trigger point right in the middle center of the rectangle, the number 1 that I'm moving right now. If I pull up the Pathfinder, I can see that the quadcopter is going to remain focused on that point throughout the entire mission. Now let's add a second focus trigger in the bottom left of the path, and I'm going to push and hold, create it, and it's going to default to a subject trigger. I'm going to click on the options and change it from subject to direction. Let's also make sure that the yaw reference is set to course so that the camera is focused in the direction the quadcopter is going. Now if I use the path inspector again, at the beginning it will remain focused on focus trigger point 1, and then once it gets to the second focus trigger, it will start to click and immediately start focusing going forward. Now the problem is that's not a clean transition between 1 and 2. So what I want is it to interpolate between focus trigger point 1 and focus trigger 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the settings for focus trigger 1, and then I need to pair this with the next one. So I'm going to go to interpolation and say next, and then I'm going to click on the next in the bottom right of this window, which will bring up focus trigger number 2, and then I'm going to go to interpolation there and select previous. So they'll have a pair between focus trigger 1 and focus trigger 2. If I pull up the path inspector now, you'll notice that it starts focusing on focus trigger 1, but really it's focused on in between focus trigger 1 and the eventual direction that it's going to be going in when it reaches focus trigger 2. So it creates a nice smooth transition between focus trigger 1 and focus trigger 2. Once it reaches focus trigger 2, it will remain focused in that direction for the rest of the path. Let's talk about one feature that was added after the last waypoint video was created, and that's the ability to point back at a previous focus trigger point. So let's say that we create a third focus trigger point, perhaps in the upper right-hand corner here, and by default, again, it's going to set it up as a subject focus trigger. But if I wanted to have it point at the same place where focus trigger 1 is set, I would have to drag that 3 right on top of number 1, which can be a little bit messy. Instead, if I pull up the settings for focus trigger number 3 and then go down to reference focus trigger, I can change it now to focus trigger 1. It will make that number 3 go away, and now when I use the path inspector, it will start focused on focus trigger 1, transitioning to focus trigger 2, which is the direction, and then once it gets back around to that third focus point, it will go back and look at focus trigger point number 1. I'm now going to show a few new ways that have been added to control the quadcopter during the mission. The first one is adding something called the mission start marker. This is primarily if you had a very, very long mission and you didn't want to have it start from the beginning of the mission each time, or for a specific run of your waypoint mission. So let's say this was a long mission, but I wanted to have it start between waypoint 2 and waypoint 3, not have it start at waypoint 1. If I tap and hold at a point between the two missions, or between the two waypoints, and I click on mission start, you can see it added an S, and I can tap and hold and I can move this wherever I want. If I engage the aircraft at this point, instead of having it go to waypoint 1 and starting patrol, it will jump to that S and start the patrol mission from that point between waypoint 2 and waypoint 3. If I want to make that mission start marker go away, I can just tap it, bring up its options, and click on delete. And now it's just back to normal. The next thing I'm going to talk about is something that's great that was added, the ability to use the left joystick to control the speed and the direction of the flight, leaving you open to use the right joystick to control the camera. So if I go under settings, again the upper left hand corner, these three lines, and I change the mission type from patrol to joystick, and I'm also going to go down to the focus strategy and change that from triggers to joystick. So what this gives me the ability to do now is, instead, right now when I engage the aircraft, it will hover and wait for me to push on the left joystick to go forward, or pull back on the left joystick to have it go back in the waypoint mission, and then I can continue to use the right joystick to control the camera. I'm going to demonstrate this in a little bit more detail with a waypoint mission I had previously created. I'm going to go into the settings and make sure the mission type is set to joystick, and I'm also going to make sure that the focus strategy is set to joystick. At this point, I'm going to tap in the bottom center to enter into the flight dashboard. I prefer to take off and get to a safe location, and then I'm going to click on Start Engage Sequence. I'm then going to check on Checklist Complete. I had been previously flying, so I can click on Use Previous Altitude Reference, then hit Continue, and then it's going to count down and engage. Once I engage, the aircraft will immediately fly back to waypoint number 1. Now if I press forward on the left joystick, the quadcopter will start to go through the mission. The harder I press forward on the left joystick, the faster the quadcopter will go, based upon a percentage of the overall speed I had set within the mission. While the left joystick controls the speed the quadcopter moves throughout the mission, the right joystick can be used to control the camera, looking around in any direction that you want. This allows you to manually control how fast you're moving throughout your mission, as well as manually control what you're looking at with your quadcopter, all while maintaining the same path that you had set within the waypoint mission. If I pull back on the left joystick, the quadcopter will go backwards to the waypoint mission. Again, the harder I pull back on the left joystick, the faster it will go based upon the overall speed I had set within the waypoint mission. Bottom line, this gives you some great flexibility in terms of how to control your quadcopter and your camera at the same time. Just a heads up warning, if you're using your left joystick for waypoint mission speed and the right joystick for the camera, just be careful not to push both joysticks to the front center or the outside for more than 3 seconds, or you will initiate a CSC and you could bring your quadcopter down. For those unfamiliar with what a CSC is, that's the joystick action that you take when you start or stop your Phantom 3 or Inspire. The final feature I'll be discussing today will be LCMC, or Lost Connection Mission Continuation. As I had discussed previously, this allows the aircraft to continue on its waypoint mission even if it loses connection with the transmitter. The big trade-off here is that when using LCMC, you use the stock DJI flight controller versus Autopilot's flight controller. This table, which is available in section 5.8 of Flight School, provides you a list of the features that become disabled when you use the DJI flight controller versus Autopilot's flight controller. We recommend using the Autopilot flight controller wherever possible, as it gives you more flexibility and power when you're flying. However, if you think you're in a situation where you might lose control with your transmitter, feel free to use the LCMC feature. A quick reminder when it comes to corner types when using LCMC. If you created a mission with Bezier curves and then you switch and start trying to fly it with LCMC, it will switch the Bezier curves to rounded corners. So be sure to check the mission if you do include Bezier curves to ensure that it is following the correct path for you. Using LCMC is extremely easy. From the Waypoint Mode settings, simply go to Lost Connection and change it from End Mission to Continue Mission. A warning will come up letting you know the features that are no longer enabled. You click on Continue, and that's it. At this point, the DJI flight controller will be used and the Autopilot flight controller will not be used. Good luck, and we'll see you in the next video.